So I am really excited to do something new today. I have invited a special guest to the show, Dr. Jessica Higgins. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here and to talk about the topic that we have decided to talk about. So for those of you that don't know, Dr. Jessica Higgins holds 2 graduate degrees in psychology, 2 coaching certifications, and over 20 years of experience helping clients achieve successful results. She is the host of the Empowered Relationship podcast, which is how I found her. And she helps people navigate the terrain of long-lasting intimacy more skillfully and mindfully. Through her coaching and online course, clients transform pain into love and connection, which is why I invited her on the show today. So like I mentioned, I found Dr. Higgins through her great podcast many years ago. And I was sort of listening to all the episodes on repeat and just sort of binging it. Like you were like a Netflix binge for a little bit. And I reached out to you several years ago to ask a few questions. And it was so lovely to find the same caring person in real life when we connected on the phone as what you portray in the show. So I wanted you to come on the podcast today to talk about a topic that I think a lot of pet parents experience from time to time over a variety of situations, and that is resentment. Who better to be talking about resentment in relationships? Someone that holds graduate degrees in psychology, coaching certifications, like this is your jam. Relationship is your thing. So thank you again for being here. I'm very excited about our conversation.
Me too. And I know it might be unusual that I focus on couples. And as we were talking about before we started recording, that much of what I see as far as relationship principles is that it does translate to many relationships, whether or not it's parenting or being a pet parent or even friends and family. And where I focus is mostly on intimate relationship, but I do believe the principles really apply.
Yeah. Yes. Perfect. So to set the stage for you, really, I wanted to give a few examples of resentment when it comes to pet parents and their dogs. And so I was thinking about this in sort of a bunch of different types of relationships. Thinking about when pet parents might resent their dog and their dog's behavioral limitations, right? So a dog that they can no longer bring to family gatherings because the dog might have, dog may have escalated to biting and now it's not a safe situation. So they're resenting the limitations that are on their life. They might resent the training process because behavior change is a process, right? And doesn't happen overnight, despite the fact of what people think dog training is, right? It's sort of like a 6-week class and you're done. And that's not really, that is not really how the process works. And so some people might resent that the training process. They also, and I hear this often, start to resent certain family members, specifically when family members aren't honoring the training plan, or let's say they've grown up the courage to ask for what they need from their family members in order to be the advocate for their dog. And that's just not being complied with. They're sort of steamrolling those needs. And then another example is sort of people resenting or comparing themselves to other people's journeys with their dog, and especially through social media. I hear this all the time where there's a lot of great stuff on social media out there in terms of like what to do with your dog. And I have a lot of clients that call me and are like, gosh, I feel like I'm not doing enough. And now I'm finding myself resenting somebody posting something about their dog, and it sort of sends me down a shame spiral. And then I resent my dog, and it's just sort of a mess, right? So these are some common examples that I thought of and wanted to sort of set the stage for you as a pet parent, right? And I spoke to a few of my clients to get some examples, and all of these seem to be really resonant. So does that give you sort of like a lay of the land as to like how messy this can be at times?
Absolutely. And one of the things that strikes me as you're describing some of these examples is we enter into relationship, whether or not it's a job and work climate, or whether or not it's an intimate relationship or even being a pet parent, that we have ideas around what that will be like and look like. And we have our maybe even hopes and dreams. And I think sometimes this is fueled by images we might see on social media, or perhaps even in media across the board, whether or not movies or shows or what have you.
Yep.
And I think that we get very attracted to some of those romanticized versions and perhaps don't always see what's behind the scene, or what's behind the scene. Yeah. That this sometimes takes a level of investment, a level of energy to cultivate. And I believe most relationships are thriving and healthiest when there is a level of investment and engagement. And so that's not to say, you know, some of these examples, people are really well intended, they are putting in the work. I think the thing that I'm first speaking to is just the expectations that sometimes we're up against, and really that maybe it just happens. Like I know in my industry with couplehood, it's, oh, you find the one and then it's happily ever after. Like the real challenge is finding the partner, when in actuality, working with someone who's really different, has a different viewpoint, perhaps does things differently, and the conflict that emerges and how we negotiate that is actually more determinative of the success, rather than like trying to find somebody that fits. And really, we wouldn't want to be with ourselves if we find a exact match, right? Part of the dynamic dimension of couplehood is finding somebody that perhaps is different and complements you. And there's some erotic tension there too, right? With some differences. So that being said, yes, there is terrain here we're going to bump up against resentment and noticing that tension. And classically, when we look at resentment, I think what's going on there on just a face value is feeling some level of mistreatment or misunderstood, or feeling something is unfair. And so some of this is happening beneath the field of consciousness. So this is why I think it can be really helpful to slow down, perhaps look at, unpack, okay, what might I not be paying attention to that could be helpful for me to consider?
Yeah. And so is that how you would define resentment, right? Where it's got this sort of underlying tension, or this feeling, this sensation of feeling like things are unfair?
I think in a nutshell, yes, that there's some bigger ballpark. And I think it emerges differently for different people. They might find themselves feeling irritable, frustrated, getting angry, feeling upset. And that resentment of, I don't like this, right? And there's usually something underneath that of, I have a longing, I have a hope or a dream, or I have a need that perhaps I'm not aware of, that this feels unfair, or this feels unjust, or not what I had really signed up for, or intended to sign up for.
Yeah, which speaks to the expectations that you're talking about, right? Like I have a hope, I have a dream, and that was designed based off of whether they're realistic or not. That was designed from the expectations that I am bringing into this experience about having a dog, or meeting my partner, right? Or just having those expectations, whether they're realistic or not. I love that you're saying though, that like, it is one thing to like adopt a dog, or find the right breed for yourself, or find the right partner, like you were saying, but the real work is actually living with that animal and being able to put in that work, and notice when your expectations might be like misaligned with actually what's happening in reality.
Yes. And as you're talking, I also want to just normalize how all of us have hopes and dreams. And this is informative, right? It means something is important to us, and that is significant. So we don't want to disregard, or like, don't have dreams, don't have hopes. However, we want to be able to look at, how do we cultivate that? Right. Sometimes we might look at somebody who has great levels of success in their industry, whether or not they're an Olympian athlete or a huge entrepreneur that's had amazing success. It's easy to kind of look at and cherry pick. Oh, they just had it made, when really it is incredible, some of the hardships they've overcome, or the difficulties they've endured. And so the longing can be the inspiration. And even when you talk about social media, and perhaps even some envy that might come up when we imagine what someone else's experience is like with their pet, and we might feel envy. On one level, that's a mirror helping us understand there's something about what I'm experiencing that I feel discontent with, or perhaps notice that resentment. There may even be, oh, this means something to me. I want more of that. That can be inspiration, right? So I'll just pause there, because I also know it could even be an opportunity for acceptance, even grief, right? I know some people talk about grieving the dog you had hoped to have versus, so that can also happen.
Yeah. And I mean, I appreciate that you are bringing up too, like, underneath the resentment, it sounds like there's a lot of really good information about what it is that we like, what our desires are, what our hopes are. And you're right. It's information that maybe we can then make some modifications within our current situation in order to hopefully get closer to those needs. But you're right. Sometimes we can't, and there is some grief that we're experiencing, right? Like some of my clients like, okay, well, I'm not going to rehome this dog, right? So I am stuck with this dog, or I'm choosing this dog. And now how am I going to make some modifications? The modifications might not be the training plan necessarily. The modifications might be like the story we're telling ourselves, or our perspective about the situation that needs the modification in order for us to get closer to what it is that we're wanting, right? So if we're wanting like peace with our dog, is our resistance or our resentment causing some of that tension, right? And then maybe we need to change our thought process in order to get a little closer to that peace. It doesn't mean that we have solved the behavior issue, but I often find that my clients are looking to the dog to solve the whole thing and to fix that, versus how are we showing up to this whole relationship and situation.
Yeah. And I think I would just underscore the word relationship, because when we come into relationship with ideas, expectations, hopes, and dreams, that's helpful to know. And perhaps if we're projecting, which is a psychological term, meaning we're putting on the other our imagined fantasy or our expectations, and that sometimes we can bump up against, like you're describing, the reality might be very different. And if we are still so attached to that expectation or things working out in the way that we had imagined, right, that's where we can experience some force or even non-acceptance of, I want this to be what I imagined it to be, so I'm going to make this happen. Right. And this is the idea of like trying to force a round peg in a square hole. And that can create a lot of suffering in the sense of trying to force something into what you want it to be without attending to the relationship. So the underscore of the relationship is, can I meet what is? Doesn't mean we don't have maybe a learning curve that we're in and that we're aspiring to get to, or that I have to just settle, but can I be with what is? And can I meet and be attuned to the other? And can I also be attuned to myself? Right? Because I think in some scenarios, pet parents might try to give their dog everything, and they might actually not be attending to their own needs. And feel some resentment, right? Like, oh, I'm looking on social media, my friend is doing all these fun freedom, like totally, doing all these amazing things. And I'm like walking my dog in the morning, walking my dog in the evening, and feeling limited by that. And so there's some need there perhaps for a little more play or freedom. And is there a way to incorporate that? Like you said, some modifications, and being aware of, I'm attuned to myself and my needs. And then as you're talking about a dog that might have special needs or certain circumstances that require a certain level of attention, can I be present to that? And can I be relating to that? And then from there, we get to build. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. And I so appreciate that you bring up the person that is caring for their special needs dog, and they are like constant, right? And living with that can be really overwhelming. And a lot of my clientele, a lot of the listeners that listen to dog podcasts, right? They want to know more about this, and they often forget to take care of themselves. Like I hear that so often. And it's like, it's lovely. The level of commitment and the level of dedication to their animals and wanting to be able to support them. And yet, like, we need to put our oxygen masks on first, right? So I love that you bring that up, that resentment might sort of creep in a different way, right? And like, I'm trying everything for my dog and I want to put my dog first, but also wait, I need to put myself up there as well, right?
Yes.
So
I mean, even with the highest intended person, I love that you're recognizing and acknowledging the benevolence there of what one might be doing to be of service or to be loving and caring and giving, and those needs for the individual. As much as we might overlook them or backburner them, they don't go away. And this is the progression typically, is what we'll notice is the resentment. Maybe we don't even notice that. We might notice the tension and the irritability, but then we might notice that we're like, oh, I'm wanting to like do things that feel a little violent, or, and I don't mean in any kind of abusive way, but just like I'm wanting to like be a little sterner in my tone, or I'm wanting to kind of yank on the leash a little harder. And that just doesn't feel good. I'm not comfortable with that, but what's going on here, right? I'm frustrated, or I'm like, yelling and doing things that I don't normally do. That can be the progression if we're feeling resentment, and then it starts to turn a corner into being more upset or being irritable or annoyed. If we trace that back, we might be able to have some inquiry around like, oh, I'm not filling my own cup, or I'm not putting my own oxygen mask on. And we all know when we're depleted, we're stressed, we regress, right? This is when we're not at our best functioning. And I know you attend to the nervous system, and when we're when we're dysregulated, it's really hard to be in flow and relationship and a positive give and take.
Yeah. I had one client reach out to me. It's just like this well-intended, like lovely woman. And she has 3 dogs in her home. And so she's got her nervous system, the 3 of theirs, a roommate, and then a child. And one of the original goals was like, I just want to make sure that I'm regulated pretty much all the time, and so that I can support the other nervous systems in the household. And I was like, okay, so we're never gonna, like, good luck with that, right? Like,
right. I was thinking the exact same thing.
I'm not even a therapist. And I'm like, yeah, good luck with that. You're not going to be regulated all the time. And like, and so you're a human being that's going to get dysregulated. Like you said, how can we know when that's happened? What does that look and sound like? And then what behaviors are you going to do to go take care of yourself so that you then can tend to the dogs, right? And usually that is just doing something away from your dog, right? Like the other day, I have been really sick. And so I have not been able to move my body in a way that is really provides me with the level of like self-care that I need. And I found myself very frustrated the other day, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to put myself in my bedroom away from my dog, and I'm just going to punch the pillow. And like that, like, talk about violent expression, right? Like I was like, I need to move some of this energy out away from my dog, so that when I need to show up for him, like I have taken care of myself, moved some energy so that I can be present with him. And so I'm just thinking about that well-intentioned client, right? Where it's sort of like this idea that we're regulated all the time, or how can we be perfect so that we don't project anything onto our dogs? And it's just like, oh my gosh, it's not an attainable goal. Like, it's just not.
No, we live in a modern society where there's noises and all kinds of things that we don't have control over, that our nervous system is going to react to. And in any given day, I remember having Dana, she's one of the polyvagal people that's really done so much to bring the awareness around our nervous systems and how we get dysregulated and the polyvagal, but I don't want to geek out on that. But I will say she's an expert in this. And she said, in any given day, my nervous system is getting activated and going to fight or flight or dorsal, like many times in one day.
Yeah.
And this is somebody that trains other clinicians around the nervous system. And this is part of our wiring. We're human beings that are wired up to respond to our environment and to other mammals, right? And so if you're open to sharing, I don't know if you are, but I'll just say it for myself. If I give myself the opportunity to turn towards whatever resentment or frustration I'm having, and I give myself an outlet, whether or not it's through journaling or moving my body or moving the energy through hitting a pillow, it actually helps me come into greater contact with it. I get more awareness, and then it starts to reveal more around like, oh, okay, I'm scared, or oh, I'm grieving, or oh, I have greater insight into what my experience is. And so then that helps me then maybe know how to move forward and take steps to take care of myself even further. And I don't know if you've ever felt that.
100%. Yeah. And I think, when I think about the word resentment, it was really interesting as I was writing to you about this and drafting the outline. I'm like, gosh, resentment to me, when I think about that word, it immediately, I can hear people say like, oh, don't get to the point in your relationship where you have resentment, right? Because like once you have resentment, your relationship is a mess. Or so there's this interesting like cousin that hangs out with resentment, which is shame. Like, oh, now I feel resentment. Oh, this is not good. This means that this relationship is like on the rocks, or I really shouldn't have this feeling. If I have this feeling, then it indicates something really negative about the relationship. And it wasn't until I would say this year where if I was feeling resentment, or usually I noticed the irritability first. If I'm feeling irritable, just stopping and giving it some airtime, like, oh, wow, there's the thing. Okay. It's uncomfortable. Okay. But like, it's not like, ooh, resentment, I shouldn't feel this, push it down. Like, I don't want to get caught up in that shame spiral about the whole thing. I'm sort of, like you said, sort of turn towards it. Like, I'm feeling resentful of this training process or of this dog or whatever.
Yeah.
Just giving it some airtime, even though I know it's really scary for a lot of people. It feels like it like dissipates the charge or something.
Yes, I would say it does. And for me, it feels like a signpost that it gives us entry into the information
Like
that perhaps we've been ignoring, right? Because if we're on track, like one of the training, perhaps examples might be goals that somebody has around what they're going to train their dog and how fast they're going to accomplish that. And so the trajectory around how they're trying to accomplish that and the pacing of that. And if it's not working to their hopes and they're feeling frustrated, right? And that resentment, right? To be able to turn towards that and maybe explore it a little bit, right? Oh, what does accomplishing this goal help me? Or what would this provide for me? And getting to know it and understanding and using that as that information we're talking about. But it also helps us know how, as you said, to modify. So, oh, maybe we need to slow this down, or maybe we need to slow down the pace, or maybe we need to expand the timeline around when we're going to accomplish this, so we can give it a little more breathing room, that then I can maybe feel more relaxed. My nervous system isn't so hyped up around, we got to accomplish this goal. Or if there is a real significant goal, then maybe we need more support, or you know what I mean? There could be ways to do this, because to come back to what you were saying around the trajectory of this, my experience is if we continue to try to suppress or ignore, it's only going to amplify. And to your point about, oh, should we be concerned about resentment? In at least couplehood, one of the John Gottman Institute, a major researcher, talks about contempt, right? And contempt is the thing that really is something to be aware of, because that's when we start to really dislike the other, hold them in contempt, like see them through these distorted lenses because of what's accumulated. So I would say, if we even imagine a spectrum here, if we are paying attention to the irritability or perhaps slight feelings of resentment, and we can turn towards that, glean whatever might be able to glean with that, then we're able to process it, dissipate the energy, and actually be able to get to more of a win-win. Something's not working, but if we ignore it, keep forging ahead, trying to force, just keep going, likely it's not going to go away. Likely it's going to accumulate. And then we're going to have bigger expressions of either the manifestation of resentment or bigger intense feelings of resentment that then could turn towards contempt. And I think that's like a long trajectory. I don't think that just happens. I don't think that's a short window. I think that there's a lot of space there. But if we look at the pattern of turning away and just keep forging ahead and ignoring that, I think that's where it can down the road be significant.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like to think about it as a spectrum because, like you said, it's like a little flag, right? Just saying, hey, look at me. I need some of your attention because I have information for you to alleviate some of the suffering from your own thought process or so on and so forth, right? So it is just sort of reframing that resentment or irritability, even if you want to start there, is information. So turn towards the irritability and get curious.
Yes.
I hear you asking like questions, right? Like, what is this about? Or do we need to change the time frame? Or is that thought process realistic or whatever, right?
What am I not liking here? What am I finding like that it's just pleasurable? I mean, even when you were saying sometimes you need space from your dog and that it doesn't always seem viable in the moment to get to a win-win, right? Absolutely. And perhaps if we do that, turning towards glean the information, we can work towards, oh, maybe I don't really enjoy walking around the neighborhood as much as I thought, or I do this because I know my dog likes getting out and it's convenient. But maybe if I took 5 extra minutes and I went to a park, or if I went to the beach or the mountain or whatever is in the vicinity that feels doable, perhaps I would get so much more joy and pleasure out of that experience of walking my dog in a more beautiful nature setting, that maybe I could spend that extra 5 minutes and experience more joy and have a more pleasurable time with my dog on a walk.
Yeah, I'm smiling at you because I'm like, gosh, how did she know that I struggled with that? Because so my dog is 13 and a lot of the listeners have heard this, but I've received a lot of feedback from listeners that they really enjoy when I talk about how emotionally challenged I am that my dog is older and how I'm I wouldn't say, maybe I would say I resent that he's slowing down. I don't resent him, right? But I resent
his capability.
Yeah, I resent his lack of capability, or I resent the aging process. Like there's grief under there, right? And so it's funny because for a long time I was like, gosh, like our walks through the neighborhood are so slow and they're so like they're boring I think for him too. And so I was like, okay, Marissa, because I always get in my way, right? I'm like, okay, if I was your client, like what would you do? Right. And yeah, like loading him in the car, just driving 5 minutes down the road to a park so that environment actually, it stimulates him and he gets really excited and it's just more dynamic and pleasurable for both of us, right? So I could have just gotten stuck in, great, I resent this walk, I resent him aging, I resent the whole thing. And yeah, I could have stayed there for a while, but like you said, I'm sort of turning towards it like, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling resentful. What do you need right now? Oh, okay, I need this to feel more pleasurable for both of us. Okay, well, how can we get there? Right. So that turning towards and the asking questions. So it's just perfect that you use that as an example because yeah, I think we get stuck in our own perspective so often.
I think this is where the shame comes up too, is we make it not okay. Oh, I'm resentful. That's such a bad dog mom, or that's such a
totally
right. Like that's not acceptable. And that's not benevolent or nice of me. And so we want to cut it off and shut it down. So absolutely. I think that turning towards giving a little space that could be so helpful to up level. Actually, even talking about elderly dog, we had a neighbor, my husband and I just moved recently, and our neighbor for like 4 or 5 years, super cute couple. And they had an older dog. They had 3 dogs, 2 of which could walk fine, but the other was much slower. But they got a stroller and they put the dog in the stroller. And so they would go on these long morning walks every morning, and the dog's just like hanging out and enjoying it. So
yeah,
I mean, but they were getting their walk in,
yeah,
and it wasn't limiting them. Yes. I think depending on where you are, that might seem a little embarrassing to have your dog, but I think it's becoming more common that we're having different ways of supporting aging dogs and their capability and mobility. So
yeah, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I'll get like Sully like a radio flyer, because he's pretty big, as you can see it like in the picture. He's 90 pounds. I'll be just pulling him on in a radio flyer. But okay, well, we were talking a lot about sort of noticing the irritability. And so if I'm thinking, and that's totally okay to be reactive to what's coming up in the moment, right? Where you're noticing a level of irritability. But I always talk about with my clients about how can we also be proactive too. So what do you think, like, what would you say is a proactive practice in order to maybe reduce the level of resentment you might feel or irritability you might feel?
Yes. Well, if you haven't noticed, one of the things that I feel is so closely tied to resentment is knowing what we're experiencing and what we're needing and what we're wanting. And that I would say a large portion of people didn't grow up in an environment, and I'm not saying like an abusive, traumatic environment. I'm talking about very stable upbringings with parents that were loving and caring, but perhaps maybe weren't always emotionally attuned, or were very high achieving or performance oriented, or whatever their circumstances were, that sometimes we learn through the environment that, oh, if I bring up this need, it's not necessarily going to be responded to. So I learn to keep it internal, suppress it, turn away from it. And we learn to function in other ways, being very intellectual or being very able to achieve and dial things in. So there can be a backdrop to this around how we've been shaped around being aware of our needs and feeling comfortable to articulate them or even acknowledge them.
Yep.
And so when we think about being proactive, just recognizing how comfortable am I in being connected to what I need and what I want. And this isn't just, a static thing that's going to change. Every week, every day, it might change. Right. And so when we look at being proactive, can I be in greater connection and conversation with myself around what am I liking? What's not working? What am I needing? And to be cognizant of that and conscious of that so that we can make these more micro adjustments rather than having to do these bigger swings when we're like suppressing, and then something flares that lets us know, okay, hey, like you said, a flag or a signpost that indicates something's up here, and can we notice? But perhaps we can do even the finer adjustments around, oh, this was not fun, or my dog's splattering food all over the floor. Like, this is annoying. Or, I live in a cold area and then like having to clean up my dog, and there could be some things that can we make some micro adjustments that can support this process flowing better. And, I know that doesn't always feel possible. And if we're giving space and acknowledgement to it, I think it's setting it up more for success rather than I don't have needs or I'm not even aware of them. And then I'm getting like surprised by my reactions.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the word micro adjustment, because it reminds me of something that we do in behavior modification, which is shaping. So we are marking and reinforcing small approximations to get to a final behavior. And so I'm loving micro adjustments. Also feels like digestible and like easy to try. Right. A lot around my house, I've got a lot of Post-its that say like, what do I need? And it's a reminder for both myself and my partner to ask ourselves, and it might just be like water, or it might just be like a 5-minute break, or it might just be like snuggle with my dog, right? Or whatever it is, but it's not this sort of, it's just a reminder to sort of check in that I have needs. Am I meeting them? And when they are small like that, it feels easier to reach out and grab it, like make it happen, versus like I have a need for my dog's behavior to completely modify overnight. Like it's just not really achievable, right? So then you're not going to get reinforced for noticing your need and making adjustments to sort of get access to it if your need feels so big. And so I love this little micro adjustment, like what do I need? What do I not need? Just throughout the day as a reminder for folks.
Yes. Like we get to experience the reward or the win of it. And there's I think a learning curve or building the muscles. We're getting practice when we're staying awake to, or even practicing being aware of the need. Cause I think it is much harder than it is the way we're talking about it. It's much more difficult in practice to be aware. I think there's some times where my husband will kind of ask me, like, reflecting, he might see something on my face and he's like, asking me like, how are you doing essentially? And I'm like, I'm good. And then he's like reflecting and I'm like, well, wait, yeah, maybe like I just wasn't aware that I was feeling something. And then if I take a moment and I pause, then I can kind of connect and then share, oh, well, yeah, so as I kind of feel, I think this is something, or it's been a hard day or whatever it is. And so I think that the more that we can be in relationship to it, I think we get more practice, but it can be difficult to give space if we haven't been raised or I don't think our culture really supports this very much, for sure. I know, I'm sure you also have a similar feeling, just being in practice or your own business. There's a level of pressure that I put on myself to achieve certain things, or certain things that I have going on my project list. And I will admit, I'm still like, oh, okay, the stretching and the breathing, or whatever it is that I'm noticing and paying attention to and trying to incorporate and be better at the practice around. So it is a moving, it's like anything when we say practice, right?
I was just going to say that. Yeah. It's a great word, practice, which it's funny this year, not this year, we're in 2022 now, but last year I felt like because of a few modifications I made, I started to find myself speaking to myself like in a very kind way, like, hey, you don't need to finish that today. Or like, those emails will be there in the morning, like go walk your dog, or like just really kind. And I found myself going like, who is that? Like, who is, like, what voice is that? I kind of have a crush on her. Right. I'm like, wait, no, that's me taking care of me. Right. So, I think that you're right that we don't see this displayed in our culture a lot in our society. And so, it is going back to, putting on that oxygen mask first so that we can take care of everyone else, including our dogs. Like again, my heart just goes out to I have so many amazing clients that are really committed to doing the work. Most dog owners are not like, hey, I can't wait to become a dog trainer and like deal with really complex behavior issues, right? And I have so many clients that are really committed to doing that work. And a lot of them are very hard on themselves, right? Like if I was only regulated enough, if I was only perfect enough, if I was only fill in the blank, whatever, then maybe we wouldn't be stuck in this challenging situation. And it's not ever really the case. Like it's not that simple. It's not just you as the pet parent completely changing. And it's not always all about you. And so I just want our listeners to sort of hear that like you're all trying the best that you can, and we're still going to make mistakes regardless if we implement this proactive plan or not.
Agreed. I'm so grateful that you brought that up. I was starting to feel something similar around if we notice resentment or irritability or something's not working, it can be easy on the first blink, be like, oh, this isn't okay, or I'm screwing up, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
messing this up. And that can create a lot of shame and that
Mm-hmm.
downward spiral that can feel really difficult. And I would even say the same for couplehood, right? When there's a conflict, especially in developing relationships that are pretty new, maybe a year in, a year and a half in, right? When they start noticing, oh, you do it like that, or oh, that's how you think.
Yeah.
And like we start, the neurochemicals wear off and we're like, oh, I didn't realize you did it like that. Right. And then we
That's a
start,
perfect way to describe it. The neurochemicals have worn off, and now you're like, oh, interesting. What's that about?
right, exactly. Or like, okay, right. Okay. Like, so on first level, we could blame that and shame that, like, oh, we're not compatible, or I'm screwing this up, or this isn't working,
Mhm.
or something's not okay, and just judge it, feel shame about it. And then it's this really difficult stuck spot. So I'm not saying let's bypass the pain. I'm saying, oh, there's again the signpost, the signal, the flag. And can we look at this in the way that we deal with it? There's lots of room for opportunity here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we don't make it bad right out of the gate, then perhaps we can be more curious, like you mentioned, and explore
Mm-hmm.
and come up with more possibility. Because as you were even saying, just the subtle small steps feel doable, but this is also where we tend to learn about real transformational change isn't in a
Yeah.
light switch. It isn't in
Yeah.
a like moment. It's these small, doable, progressive, repetitive things that over time we can see how vastly that has created to transformational change.
Yeah. Yeah. Just even, I'm just thinking about the example where I'm kinder in talking to myself and allowing myself to like rest and take some space. Like that, that's been like 40 years in the making, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because I
Yeah.
mean, I'm so type A, high drive, and achieving is my Enneagram, right? I mean, it's become my identity, right? And so I think that has been cultivated over many years of trying to show up in a different way and not having it be my identity. So you're right. It's all these little steps, like all these little moments in time that will then help make that shift that you're talking about.
I think sometimes when we can be in the practice of being in relationship and open and accepting and maybe acknowledging, okay, I had a hope here, and can I just recognize that I might not get what I'm wanting in this exact moment, that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's better than we even imagined it could be.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that happens in many forms, and especially even I've heard stories around even being a dog parent, and that, there's some hope or dream and imagined sense of how it's going to be. And if I can accept, turn towards the relationship of what is, and then what gets created out of that, and the learnings and the development and the relationship
Mm-hmm.
of that can be so profound, even with
So
the
profound.
hardships.
Yeah. Yeah. Because nobody was ever like, oh, I had a really great I had a really great week. Everything went perfectly, and I learned a ton about myself. Right? Like that doesn't
Yeah.
that doesn't ever happen. It's always like I'm in this relationship. This is really challenging. Like, I've been rubbed up against my edge, and wow, this has been such an amazing experience and sort of a beautiful growth opportunity. Right. I hear that from my clients often where they're just like, wow, I really thought this was going to be about, you were going to teach me a few things about how to hold the leash differently or whatever. And like, this has sort of blown open my thoughts about what is possible to learn from my relationship with my dog. Right. So it always happens in the hardship. Right. So
No kidding. No kidding.
yeah.
I'm sure we could riff on this forever, because I'm thinking
Yeah.
about boundaries, right? And how to lead and be attuned and in relationship, but also be structured. And some people have a hard time with boundaries and structure, and how that can be such great material for developing, right? In the mirror of like, oh, well, how come it is difficult to set a boundary, and all the emotions around that and the learning
Yes.
possibilities
Yes.
there. It's tremendous.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been so great. And we were going to link to all of your stuff in our show notes, but where can people find you online? Because you've got an amazing podcast, like I mentioned already, amazing programs. Where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. So the hub is drjessicahiggins.com. That's doctor with a DR, and all my materials there. Also, Empowered Relationship Podcast, which can be found on any of the podcast players. And yeah, I have lots of material and information and support tools on that website.
Awesome. We will link to all of that. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, my pleasure. It's been fun to talk about this with you, and I appreciate the work you're doing and supporting people and being better dog parents.
Oh, thank you. And you as well.